Welcome back to SuperString. Today I will show you a dramatization dream film from 2006 named The Bothersome Man. Spoilers ahead. Look out and fare thee well. In a tram station, Andreas Ramsgel watches a couple kiss. It is a bizarre kiss, extremely deliberate and with no enthusiasm in it, as though they were doing it since they should, and not on the grounds that they appreciate it. In the wake of mulling over everything briefly, Andreas chooses to bounce on the track as he recollects how this generally began. Quite a while back, in the desert, an elderly person hangs a welcome sign on a neglected corner store just before a transport shows up. This transport drops a messy-looking Andreas, who has no clue about what is happening. Now that Andreas is here, the elderly person takes the close down then, at that point, drives the novice to the city while making thoughtless casual chit-chat. The region is spotless and entirely serene, maybe to an extreme so. Andreas is given his very own condo and a task as a bookkeeper before he is just let potentially run wild for the evening. Investigating the condo doesn't take since a long time ago it is little and has the minimum essentials rather than even the littlest beautification, despite the fact that it incorporates some apparel also, regardless of whether they are extremely basic suits. Andreas shaves off his facial hair prior to hitting the sack, so he is more appealing for his most memorable day at work. The following morning, he goes to work at a renowned organization where he meets a couple of his colleagues and is given a cash to kick him off before he is displayed to his office. Like his condo, the workplace is little and just has the minimum essentials, so Andreas goes through the day punching numbers. He just has some time off to eat, for which he goes to a seat close to the workplace. Coming back, he sees something upsetting in a house across the road, the body of a man trapped in the railing of an apartment complex. No one in the space appears to mind. They all go on with their lives. Collectively of cleaners stop by to eliminate the body without showing any consideration. It is possible that they simply deal with it like a sack of waste to be taken out. At the point when Andreas gets back to his office a second after the fact and glances through the window, the railing has proactively been cleaned and there is no hint of anything unusual occurring there. After work is finished, Andreas goes to a bar, yet he doesn't have a generally excellent time drinking without anyone else. At the point when he goes to the restroom, he whines about the liquor in this spot being watered down since it significantly affects him at all. The man on the floor close to him dissents, saying it has forever been this way. However, a voice from behind a slow-down entryway concurs. This voice thinks nothing tastes right, be liquor, chocolate, or ladies. Their discussion is intruded on when more men stroll in. However, a while later, Andreas attempts to follow the man from the slow-down when he leaves the bar. He sees him enter a structure and turn on the light in one of the cellar lofts, from which magnificent music comes out. Andreas starts living in an exhausting and thoughtless daily schedule of simply working and eating that preferences don't like anything before the television. One evening, he concludes he needs to cause a ruckus a tad and feels something else, so he lets the paper shaper hurt his finger. At the point when his associates come to mind him, they don't appear to be upset at the reality he has lost a finger. They simply ask him for what reason he is perched on the floor. Andreas drops from blood misfortune and awakens a couple of seconds after the fact with his hand dressed up toward the rear of a vehicle, having a place with the cleaners, who don't draw in with Andreas's endeavor at casual conversation and drop him at his loft without a word. Whenever Andreas goes to the washroom to remove the wrap and clean the injury, he is stunned to find his finger is back and well without even a scar. With an urgent need to find solutions, the following day Andreas drives to the neglected service station in the desert and watches the man set up the sign to invite a renewed individual. At the point when the transport starts heading out, Andreas follows it in his vehicle, however he rapidly fails to focus on it, so there is no place for him to go. Andreas returns to work and tracks down his supervisor in his office, advising him that they believe him should be blissful. They permit Andreas to request anything he really wants, be another PC or another seat, and he can take as much time depending on the situation for his midday break. Nonetheless, Andreas turns him down and guarantees him he is fine. Today he chooses to eat in the organization's cafeteria and joins the table his collaborators are at as opposed to eating alone. He figures out how to fit in by joining a discussion about furnishings, and this acquires him a solicitation to an evening gathering. After work, Andreas goes out on the town to shop for some pleasant garments and a container of wine and strolls by the window, having a place with the man from the bar. He attempts to hear the music once more, yet when he comes excessively close, a couple of cleaners stops by and calls him out for his unusual way of behaving. Later in the evening, during the evening gathering, Andreas meets Anne Britt, an inside architect. Both of them hit it off and consent to go out on the town at some point. At the point when supper is finished, Andreas strolls her home and they wind up going through the night together. Now that his life is beginning to improve, Andreas is feeling better. He purchases a plant for his office work area, gets a more pleasant vehicle, and moves in with Anne. Several cooperates on a major task to redesign the entire house, and when they are done, they set up their own evening gathering for their companions. However, the positive mindset doesn't keep going long. Before long, Andreas is back in a wearing daily schedule out. Visits with companions are generally casual discussion about furnishings, his evenings with Anne are performative, not enthusiastic, and everything she can discuss is refurbishing the house. One evening, Andreas cannot rest, so he makes some nothing-tasting espresso, and when Anne keeps an eye on him, he attempts to enlighten her regarding his bad dream. In any case, Anne says she doesn't believe him should talk like that and returns to the subject of the house. Occasionally later, Andreas starts focusing harder on his associate Ingeborg and chooses to ask her out. In the wake of calling Anne and telling her he needs to work additional hours, Andreas takes Ingeborg to the cinema. The film is somewhat miserable, however he is the only one crying, in spite of the fact that essentially Ingeborg lays her head on his shoulder. A short time later, Andreas drives Ingeborg home and inquires as to whether she would be alright with messing around with him while he keeps on residing with Anne. Ingeborg acknowledges, and they wind up making out. Andreas and Ingeborg start having a mysterious illicit relationship, despite the fact that they figure it would be great not to need to stow away. One evening, burned out on these exhausting hours enjoyed with Anne before the television, Andreas tells her he has met another person and he needs to separate. Anne doesn't look irritated, however, she simply requests that he hold on until Saturday to move out in light of the fact that they are having visitors that day. When the evening gathering passes, Andreas goes to visit Ingeborg, astounding her with blossoms and an exceptional reservation at an extremely pleasant cafe that will open its entryways only for them. Andreas illuminates her, he has left Anne, yet Ingeborg doesn't look invigorated. As a matter of fact, she looks confounded on the grounds that she didn't think they were in a committed relationship. Ingeborg is seeing different folks as well, so Andreas requests that she dump them and come live with him. She says she wouldn't see any problems with doing as such, however she doesn't sound excited about it. It is more similar to she is simply accepting the way things are. Andreas attempts to cause her to concede she enjoys him more, or that he is more extraordinary than the others, however Ingeborg simply continues to rehash every one of her bows or something similar to her. Feeling trapped in a discussion that sounds more mind-numbingly repetitive, Andreas leaves the cafe without completing his supper. This is the means by which the story returns to the start. In the wake of watching the couple kiss and understanding he won't ever have enthusiasm from this point forward in his life, Andreas gets out ahead and trusts that a couple of trains will pass. In any case, after 3 hits, he actually doesn't get needy needs. The stations at last close, and now that he will rest a couple of hours, Andreas assembles energy and solidarity to follow the good reason to have hope and gets back to the city. The cleaners observe him and bring him back home without a word or in any event, endeavoring to deal with his injuries. At the point when Anne sees him, she doesn't respond either, simply lets him know they have been welcome to go karting with companions. Feeling surrendered, Andreas acknowledges. A couple of days after the fact, in the wake of drinking alone at the bar once more, Andreas recalls the person from the slow down and attempts to track down him. He can hear beautiful music emerging from his window once more, so he climbs the side of the structure to get into a back passage and arrive at the cellar, where he at long last meets the person, whose name is Hugo. Andreas needs to persuade Hugo to give him access, since his new companion is frightened to cause problems for what he has inside his little room. An artwork, a roof loaded up with lights, and an opening on the divider where the music comes from. Subsequent to promising he will keep quiet, Andreas is permitted to remain and pay attention to the music with Hugo. The following day, Andreas is diverted working, which stands out and makes him beware of him. Notwithstanding, when Andreas starts looking at missing the genuine taste of chocolate and seeing youngsters around, his supervisor is weirded out and leaves. Still resolved not to surrender, Andreas tells Anne he will be burning the midnight oil and starts spending his nights in Hugo's room, making the opening greater with different apparatuses to escape ideally. From the beginning, Hugo is against it since it will get them captured, however when a beautiful smell begins emerging from the opening as well, Hugo chooses to help. The opening at last turns into a passage, and Andreas and Hugo like to sit in it and have espresso while paying attention to the music and hearing the delightful sound of children snickering. One morning, Andreas goes to work just to figure out he has been supplanted with a renewed individual. His supervisor lets him know it isn't terminating him, however rousing him to track down another profession. Yet when Andreas leaves the structure, he sees cleaners hanging tight for him outside. Not having any desire to get found out, Andreas returns inside and leaves through the secondary passage, all things considered. Presently Andreas has no worries of all to chip away at the passage, which turns out to be large to such an extent that even the neighbors start smelling the exquisite fragrance and listen to the music that happens to it. They come to thump at Hugo's entryway, so he sends them away saying they are fixing a hole. However, this main sources the neighbors to assemble around the window outside. In the long run, they arrive at the finish of the passage and the divider the opening is on. Andreas embeds his hand through it, and it turns out in a wonderful, vivid, splendid house, with the sound of kids playing outside reverberating in its dividers. Andreas's hand is waved around, and he figures out how to get some newly prepared cake, which he continues to eat and wonder about how flavorful it tastes. He is so infatuated with this cake that he scarcely responds when cleaners at long last show up to remove him and Hugo. A couple of seconds after the fact, Hugo is permitted to leave, yet the cleaners take Andreas to meet the city chiefs, who let him know individuals are blissful there, and they are glad for that. Thereafter, the elderly person comes to get Andreas and a couple of cleaners in his vehicle, while an alternate gathering of cleaners seals the opening in the storm cellar and cleans everything, so it seems as though nothing worked out. Andreas is returned to the unwanted corner store, and when the transport stops by to drop off a renewed individual, the cleaners put Andreas inside the gear compartment. While Andreas is removed, life go on as expected in the city. Both Anne and Ingeborg get new sweethearts, and Hugo returns to his old work. When he becomes accustomed to all the shaking, Andreas nods off inside the transport, not awakening until it at long last stops. He kicks the compartment entryway open and comes out, just to wind up in a frozen no man's land. The transport leaves when Andreas comes out, abandoning him in the blizzard.